Megan Stark-Evans, costume designer for the Amazon film Sound of Metal. Thank you so much for being here. Your two main characters in this film are heavy metal musicians, but they have sort of limited financial means. So what were the important considerations for giving us a sense of who they are and what their personalities were like through their clothing?
Staying true to their limited financial means and to the fact that they're in that heavy metal and punk scene, which encompasses a lot of DIY in every way, from, you know, basement shows and random dirty basements and living in the Airstream trailer that they tour in, but it's also their home. I believe that they would do a lot of thrifting and vintage shopping, possibly collecting clothes from other friends and musicians. So I tried to stay true to that. I actually got a lot of advice, and I worked with this guy, Sean Powell, who's in a punk band called Surfboard. And Sean is a former heroin addict. But now he's clean, and he is in this great punk band, which is on Julian Casablancas' indie label. And he's been deep in that scene since the 80s and 90s. And he was able to give me a lot of advice as to kind of how those that people live in that scene and how they would be wearing their clothes, how they'd be sharing. I know that a lot of Sean's clothes actually come from his friends. A lot of his friends are making their own clothes, screen printing their own stuff, making their own patches and pins and all that. So I tried to stay very true to that. I tried to come up with backstories for them where they would be doing their own mending. If you see the film, it's shot very intimately. So there's a lot of these small details that I think don't always come through because the film is so tight in their face the whole time. But they're on every single article of clothing they wear, there's visible mending, there are patches, there is something they've maybe roughly embroidered in it that's some sort of like a, you know, a weird, obscure punk reference, or there's, you know, holes in everything. I really wanted everything to look super thrash. So we worked really hard on the aging and dyeing of it all. And we went to, you know, researching what kind of bands would have been influential for these, for Ruben and Lou's band. So we went to looking at bands from the 80s and 90s, such as Einstürzende Neubauten, which is a German industrial noise band. Another 80s Japanese punk band called Gizm, and all these sort of obscure, more obscure references that would really inform the influences that Ruben and Lou had in their own music, and that they would actually be wearing those clothes. Another thing that Ruben and Lou do is they share all their clothing. So the idea is they're living in this Airstream. The clothing is strewn all around. Most of the time it's, you know, in a pile on the floor, or they're sharing a drawer, but they share clothing. And for Lou, it becomes kind of an element of protection to wear Ruben's clothing.
Yeah, I did notice that, you know, there's this like jockey club shirt that you see her in, and then later you see him in it. And it does sort of, this idea that they sort of exist in the same kind of wardrobe, or they share wardrobe, does really kind of speak to their intimacy in an unspoken way that I thought was very effective. You know, was that part about what you wanted to kind of convey, was this kind of interconnectedness between them?
Absolutely, yeah. The basis for their relationship is they're extremely close. They've kind of saved each other from their respective addictions, and they've channeled all that energy into their music. They're both audiophiles. They're obsessed with touring and, you know, becoming better and supporting each other. So anyway, it was important for them to share clothes for that reason. And it's really quite a codependent relationship. So that also speaks to that element.
And then yeah, another major part of the story brings Ruben, Riz Ahmed's character, to this deaf community where he's trying to learn to kind of function in the world after losing his hearing. and there are a lot of different characters there who we learn varying degrees about. Surely they have all these different backgrounds. Like, what did you kind of want? Like, did you want to kind of contrast Ruben with this group of people, or just have it be this very diverse group of people in terms of how they looked, how they presented, what kind of maybe their histories were?
I did want to contrast Ruben. When he arrives there, Lou has actually forced him to go because she sees after he starts losing his hearing, he starts smoking again. He starts these steps that appear that he could be sort of going downhill back into those warning signs of his addiction. So she sees that, and then she calls his sponsor, and they end up finding this deaf community that's for recovering addicts. And so they drive there, and it's all very much against what he wants to do. He's sort of taken there kicking and screaming, even though he knows he needs to make some sort of change, but he certainly doesn't want to. So he arrives, and he's wearing these clothes, which are from, the first part of this time that we see with him, the life as he knows it, which are these, dark, holy band t-shirts and stiff, worn out jeans and stiff combat boots, wallet chains, all these things that he sort of wears as armor to protect himself from the world, and also to make a statement about who he is, and that audio and that his band is what he stands for. And so he arrives to the deaf community, and I did want to feel really a cross-section of people in this community, because that's often what recovery communities are. Deaf, hearing, what have you, it's a cross-section of people. It's a cross-section of socioeconomic situations. So the interesting thing about that portion of the film is that we actually worked with a lot of real people. So they weren't necessarily actors, the people in the deaf and hard of hearing community that we see. They were actually real people, and I wanted to play into what their true style was for the most part, with some tweaks. And of course, we go through everything and choose what we think is best. But at the end of the day, they actually wore a lot of their own clothes, and that was important to conveying the characters of who they were.
And
budget. So,
and as you mentioned, Ruben is sort of brought to this community kicking and screaming, and so that leads to a separation between him and Lou, and they sort of reconnect at a later portion where she's been living with her father, and there's a lot of history there. So when we see Lou again, it's sort of like, what did you want to convey about like the difference in her and maybe the changes she's been undergoing while we've been spending all that time with Ruben?
Well, one thing that happens is there's a portion of the film while Ruben's still in the deaf addict community. He goes, kind of steals away into an office and gets on the computer, and which he's not supposed to do. He's not supposed to have any contact with the outside world, and he hasn't had any contact for, the months that he's been there. He gets on the computer, he looks up Lou's name, and he finds a video of her performing in Paris. And what she's wearing when she performs in Paris is this kind of dirty white coverall jumpsuit that's vintage workwear. And it's tucked into boots, and her hair is pulled back, and she's wearing different jewelry than she usually does. And the shape of what she's wearing, it's very covered, and that's quite a contrast to what she wears when she and Ruben used to perform, which was showing a lot more skin. And she's really redefining who she is without him. So that's one element. And actually that jumpsuit, to me, it kind of looks like a spacesuit because it's white, and it's almost like she's on another planet away from him because she really is so disconnected. They haven't spoken in months. And then once we transition into the end of the movie where you see them in Paris, you see Lou in her new life with her father. You see her looking so much more healthy and recovered. Actually, there was another costume designer who did that portion. Her name's Katherine Van Brie, and I thought she did a great job of executing the character arc for Lou, and transitioning her into something that felt Parisian and chic without being overdone, and it stuck to her color palette as well. It didn't, it wasn't putting her in something that was like, it's yellow or blue and now I'm happy and everything's great. She's still struggling, but she's becoming a different version of herself, and she's wearing those black and white tones. So I thought that really, that was good.
And you mentioned this kind of thrift shop aesthetic for these characters and where they might shop and how they might get their clothes. Was there a lot of thrift shopping involved in like sourcing the costumes? You mentioned distressing them, or were you looking for things that looked already like they had sort of lived a life, or did you kind of prep clothes to look that way?
It was probably half and half. A lot of the band T-shirts we bought new, or we had screen printed, and just had to, rip them up. And we had 3 age or dye days, which wasn't very much for what we needed. So we did a lot of the aging dyeing by ourselves after we exhausted those days. We were super low budget. We were running over stuff with the car, those old chestnuts. So some of it was new. Ruben's jeans from Levi's were new, and our ager dyer did an incredible job of breaking them down and making them look super old and worn. And then other things, came from thrift shops, from vintage stores. I mentioned I worked with Sean Powell in terms of getting the costumes right for that, punk and hardcore scene that they were in. And he let me raid his closet, and he had some incredible things. And, when it comes to collecting interesting items that are thrifted and vintage, you can have time to do it. You need to do it over a long period of time. And we didn't have that time. And Sean had incredible things that I was able to pull from. So that was great. And we even borrowed things from friends of his, and, I would do an exchange where then I would go looking for things that they would like and sort of send it back to them in Goodwill.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you for talking to me about this, and we'll talk to you again in a little bit.
Thank you.
Lou Eyrich, costume designer for The Prom. Welcome. The movie is adapted from the recent Broadway musical about a group of Broadway stars who fight for a gay teenager who wants to take a girlfriend to prom. Now, the first and most important question for such an extravagant production like this one is, what exactly was the sequins budget on
this? That's funny. We had a very good budget. For once, I wasn't I wasn't home sewing on the floor of my house on a Saturday night.
And how much did you use the looks from the Broadway show as sort of a jumping off point for the film? And how much did you and director Ryan Murphy sort of strike out on your own for a different creative direction?
Ryan had a very specific, kind of like a refresher button. He had a very strong color palette he wanted to follow, and we were all like huge fans of the Broadway production, but we did our own thing entirely.
And going from the Broadway stage production to the big screen, is it sort of like everything gets bigger? You kind of like want to go for broke in terms of making all the looks pop and just the shine and the color?
Yeah, and Ryan wanted to really make sure we showed a division between the people coming from New York, from Manhattan, from Broadway, coming to this small town in Indiana. So he wanted to make sure that there was a stark difference between this. I'm from the Midwest, so I don't want to sound insulting when I say a rather bland look. Let's just say not as colorful as the troupe coming in from New York. This band of fading Broadway actors who think that they're much more grand than they are.
And the film kind of starts with this grand opening number, where the Broadway actors are attending a premiere for their new musical based on Eleanor Roosevelt, and it's this incredible establishing sequence in terms of who these characters are and what their personalities are and what their kind of lifestyle is. But it's also a lot. It seemed like a lot of work because there are a lot of dancers and a lot of background actors and a lot of was that the most complex scene to costume or the most costumes maybe for the film?
I'll say yes in the fact that it was establishing this group of Broadway stars. It was establishing for the very first time. So and it was a lot of sequins and a lot of glitter, and it was about the showbiz of it all. And it was because we really wanted to get it right. There were a lot of dance numbers that we had many moving parts to consider, but yeah, I would say it is. And we did it early on, and it was night shooting and on set, the wet down, and you had women in high heels dancing. And so it was hard in that I've done musicals before, but this was a lot of very active jumping over couches and things and being lifted up onto tables. And I just wanted to make sure nobody got hurt. So it was kind of like holding my breath the whole time. We ended up getting all the shoes custom made for Nicole and Meryl so that they were very sturdy and didn't cause bloody feet by the end of the night.
And speaking of designing for musicals, with so much choreography, like how much attention goes into making sure the clothes not only look right for the film, but they also move right for the actors who need to dance, who need to jump over those couches.
Yeah, I mean, it really does only work together. So we worked very close with the choreographer, and luckily they got to have weeks of rehearsals before, and we would sit in, we would video, we would tape it so we could study it and see all the action, and then talk when in the fittings, talking to each actor, like, what are you comfortable in? And we would try different costumes on, and I think maybe the highlight of my career is watching Nicole Kidman and Meryl Streep dancing in the fitting room with all their moves and kicking their feet, and it was great. But it was very integral. But the work between the choreographer and our department and making sure everything on the day there were no accidents. And like sequins. Anybody who's done dance numbers, like you can't have sequins on the body if they're picking them up because their hands will get all ripped up. And it's just all those things you think about, that a lot of the lifts and that everybody will.
And you mentioned custom designing shoes for Meryl and Nicole. How much of the wardrobe overall was created anew for the film, and how much of it was sourced?
This one, it was about 50-50 because it was contemporary, so we were able to shop a lot of it. All the dance numbers most of them were custom made. For James, a lot of it, all his tuxedos and stuff were custom made, but everything else was very shopped. A lot of the prom dresses for the girls were made, but it wasn't a huge made-to-order show, considerably to some of the other things we do with Ryan.
And it seems like, just based on the characters' personalities, that Dee Allen, who's the Meryl Streep character, would be possibly the most fun to dress, just because even in her day-to-day wear, it looks like she's dressed for the stage, very theatrical. What was it like working with Meryl Streep and sort of getting those looks for her that really established her personality?
It's so funny how easy it was. Like, I was, of course, starstruck, and she had a lot of changes. So it was very Ryan was very precise about it. Used a lot of the same words. It was colorful. It was theatrical. She really cares about the way she looks and presents herself. So we had quite a few fittings too. And Meryl she's very hands-on with her costumes, and likes to try a lot of different things. And she plays in the fitting, and she's the one who came up with, I don't know if it made it into the final cut, but like there's a hat on and she throws the hat and she takes her cape and she plays with it. And that was all that all came about in the fitting where she was playing with the clothes. And I was mesmerized. But we did these huge lookbooks for her, and we sat down and went through page by page of who Dee Dee might be. And then her and I spoke, and then we went over to Ryan, and Ryan weighed in, and then we did another pass. And then once we got this book done, it was kind of like like an old-fashioned paper doll thing where we could say, okay, this look could work for scene 42, and then we would start building or shopping, and it was a great experience.
And addressing the high school characters in this small town. It is more subdued, of course, than the Broadway characters, but also like they still pop in a way that you always get from kind of a lot of Ryan Murphy productions, where like there's a certain sense of heightened reality to it. So what was it like, sort of walking that balance and trying to keep these characters down to earth while also kind of expressing them in a bold and clear way?
We followed a color palette pretty strict, which is like we kept them to look like high school kids and believable, but then also did want to elevate it so it wasn't, so it still would catch your eye. And part of our, one of the elements we worked with all departments was contrast. So if you would have a red wall, there would be a yellow costume. So some of it was subtle, some of it was lighting, some of it was literally the set decorating with our clothing. And you probably wouldn't notice it unless I point it out and then you watch it again. But it was almost scene by scene where we would make sure that we were doing this contrasting between the lighting, the sets, the clothing, the locations and a wall. And that was fun. I'd never worked that way before. And also just between the character Emma and Alyssa, the idea that Alyssa came from a family where she was afraid to come out and had to pretend she was the cheerleader type and dressed that cheerleader type and always be really well put together. And Emma was being raised by her grandmother and didn't have much and did all her, mostly thrifting her clothes and putting it together in a fun way. So that's kind of what we were playing with, is that she was thrift store girl and Alyssa's mom probably shopped all her clothes, but we tried to make it interesting also to watch, so it wasn't like reality, but with a little kick, like you said, heightened a bit. We did that intentionally, yes.
And speaking of Alyssa, her mother in the film is played by Kerry Washington, who, the character is this repressive kind of, PTA, head of the PTA. But late in the film, she has this, one of the boldest looks in the film, I think, like this multicolored, this incredible gown. Like, was that created or sourced, or like, it feels like it just like she was born to wear that?
It was Gucci, and Gucci did loan us the dress, and it was intentional in that it was a turning point for her. She was able to come out of her repressive state and be accepting of her daughter and loving her daughter, and coming through the tunnel in that sparkly dress represented her opening her arms and saying, I'm willing to change. I'm willing to have a bigger and brighter view.
Thank you so much for your time, and I will bring you back to talk to you with the other panelists in a little bit.
Thank you so much.
Susan Lyall, costume designer for the trial of the Chicago Seven. Thank you for joining me. The film is about the activists who were accused of inciting violence at the 1968 Democratic Convention. And since the film is based on true events and deals with so many real figures, what kind of research did you do into Abbie Hoffman and Tom Hayden and a number of the others who are featured?
Well, when you do any film that involves real people, the research is an incredibly important element of it, and it gives you a really great starting point. And in some ways, it's weirdly, I don't want to say easier because I don't want to make it sound like it's easy, but what it is to a costume designer is you have your starting point already, and you choose to follow either the exact path of the research, or you take all the research in, you make yourself incredibly informed, and then you can toss it out, or you can, use it exactly, or you can use it in a way that has the feeling of the character.
And were there characters in the film that didn't have as much sort of primary source information, where like you sort of had more freedom to invent or extrapolate?
Yes, there were a couple of characters that were invented characters. The character of Daphne, for example, who was the honeypot for poor Jerry Rubin. She was a made up character, and but certainly the seven and all the lawyers, they were all real. And even you could even look up some of the jury members. You could find a little bit of research on. So you really had a lot to go on, and you really took your inventiveness into dressing the extras.
Yeah, and something that's interesting that the costumes do in this film is they sort of express a kind of sense of politics of the characters involved. So you've got Abbie Hoffman and Jerry Rubin have this very kind of loose hippie kind of style, and then Tom Hayden is a little bit more kind of buttoned up. And then we're introduced to them at the beginning of the film, and then we cut right into those prosecutors at the Justice Department, black suits, very tailored, very fitted. What was it like creating those contrasts and kind of expressing those kind of differences through their clothes?
It was a dream job, honestly, and the ability to define a courtroom through your costumes is really a wonderful experience. It was very clear which side is the prosecution and which side is the defense. And the prosecution were, the very straight, boxy, dark suits, white shirts, skinny tie that you imagine of the 60s. It's what you imagine of the politicians, and you imagine of, NASA or whatever, any kind of the man. And then the attorneys, however, for the defense, are they more, academic, and they're more liberal, and consequently, they do not wear navy suits or charcoal gray suits or black suits. All of their suits are tweeds and browns and greens and softer fabrics and a little more rumpled, and just not a boxy dark suit like the other side. That was really a way to make them also connect with who they were defending.
Now, one of the things we see Abbie Hoffman in, played by Sacha Baron Cohen in the film, is this famous American flag shirt, where we see a lot of photos of Abbie Hoffman in that shirt.
Yes.
Was that something that you custom made for Sacha Baron Cohen, or were you able to source that, or what went into recreating that one?
That's a good question, because honestly, of all of the costumes in that film, nothing took more effort than that shirt. And I don't mean it so much. Yes, we had to have the fabric made, and yes, it was custom made. But the debate about whether or not to use it and where to use it was pretty endless. And not endless, but it just was very, very thought out. It was one of the first things I addressed with to Aaron, partly because whenever Abbie Hoffman has been portrayed in other films, he's almost always put in that American flag shirt. Then when in the first Borat, Sacha Baron Cohen goes to rodeo and he wears a rodeo shirt that's American flag. And the DP thought, oh no, they're going to think it's Borat, which was turned out to be like a non-reason. And ultimately, Abbie Hoffman wore it all the time. And he was arrested for desecration of the American flag because he wore it. Which, wearing a shirt that looks like the American flag just seems so tame today. I mean, it just, it seemed really important to use it. Now, the choice to use it as his sort of performance shirt that you cut back and forth to all the time was Aaron's idea, and it was really appropriate. I thought that was almost like the perfect solution to that. It just tied the whole thing together, in my opinion. So, no, I will just say this about, and the costume designers, I'm sure Lou and Megan will know what this is like, but, we had to have the fabric made. And the first run of the fabric, there was a little bit of a bleed in the red, and then we had to have it done again, and then we had it made, and the placement wasn't quite right of the stars, and so then we had to have it made again and run more fabric. And this is what happens with some costumes. Some piece just ends up absorbing a lot of time and energy and thought that really just no one would ever know, but it just happens like that sometimes. So.
And in addition to establishing the characters, these specific characters, they're also like very large group scenes in the film. These rallies, and of course the clash between the protesters and the police on the Hill, the violence at night, which we see later in the film. Like how much effort and time and wardrobing goes into scenes with that many active participants and actors and background actors?
Honestly, it's uncalculable. It takes so much to pre-fit all those extras, to get everyone fit, get them dressed, get them out there at night. We had a pool of, I don't know how many extras, at maybe 500 or 600 extras, because not every one of them would show up every night. We couldn't, and the riots take place over several days. No one, it's not like we changed their clothes for different days. Everyone just had one costume and they just went out there. I will say that the Chicago extras, we filmed in Chicago, that riot scene, and the courtroom was filmed in New Jersey. But the people from Chicago, the extras from Chicago, and were so fantastic when they were really into it. I mean, we were really on their turf, literally. This was literally where it happened. And plenty of them had heard about it from their parents, and they understood what it was. And they were just so in the moment with it. It was really quite wonderful. And in a way, I feel that it doesn't always happen with a bunch of extras, where they just have this really deep-seated commitment.
Welcome to our Meet the Experts Costume Designers panel. I'm here with Megan Stark-Evans from Sound of Metal, Lou Eyrich from the Prom, and Susan Lyall from the Trial of the Chicago 7. Now, these films are all so different from each other from a story and a costume perspective, but I wonder how similar or different the process is of approaching a film, like depending on what the style of it or the scope of it or the time period of it. Let's start with Lou.
Hey Susan, hey Megan, nice to meet you.
Nice to see
I've
you.
met Susan before, but love your work, and I think that it's a great panel because our shows are all so different.
Agreed. I think that's really actually brilliant. Yeah.
And I think that listening to you both, you had a completely different process than I did. Susan, you're, having to be so precise to an actual event, and but being able to put your own signature on it is great. And Megan having to create these characters out of nothing, correct? Like you had to design the whole concept of each character within a budget. And for me, for the Prom, it was almost opposite from both. It's like it was already a Broadway play, but we were remaking it the Ryan Murphy way. And it was, I hadn't shopped contemporary for years. So that was a big shift for me, like going into a mall, going into Neiman Marcus and, all over, or even internet shopping. It had been a while. I'd been doing period for years. So it was really fun, and but also really challenging, because I forgot, like, if it's not in the store, you got to make it. And that's a bigger, longer process, especially with all the sequins and beading and stuff. So for me, that was the difference this time around from what both Megan and Susan did.
Yeah, I think also, yes, we all had incredibly different projects, but then you couple that with incredibly different directors. I mean, Megan, I don't exactly know what the director of Sound of Metal, how he weighs in, but I know that Ryan Murphy weighs in significantly. But Aaron Sorkin does not really weigh in. He just, he just tells me things like, don't make it too 60s and things like that. I mean, it's really, you really have to sort of, not mind read exactly, but it's not, and I don't mean this to sound like he's not opinionated. He is, and we communicate with photos back and forth and so on, and he will say which one he doesn't like. It's not an issue that, but if you give him too many, he gets dizzy. And so it has to be you have to really handle it, curate it in a way that it is, you move forward and don't cause too much tumult. So I personally love the system, and it's great for me. And but it's not like, and also, by the way, when you work with a director like that, the way Ryan Murphy as well, is that's where it ends. There's no one else that needs to weigh in and look at things, and there's not this enormous committee effort that happens with some studio films that just can send you off the deep end. I mean, you get it all, you get it all done. You're good with the actor, you're good with the director, and all of a sudden these, like, the last minute, all the emails start pinging in, and I really like working with someone who can it's just done. It's between myself, the director, and the actor, and we're ready.
Yeah.
So. That is such a blessing. For my movie, Darius Smarter, the director, who actually wrote the script, and he worked on it for 10 years trying to get it made. And so he had a great idea of who these people were, or at least an idea of what their backstories were. And I love a backstory, something I can dig into and come up with my own ideas about what they might wear based off of that backstory. So that was really helpful for me. And it being a small film, the nice thing about indies is you don't have these, all these different entities weighing in like you do in bigger things, unless it's a Ryan Murphy. So it's, basically between Darius, the director, and the actors and I, which is just such a blessing.
There is something nice about working with the director-writer, because they really know what they meant when they wrote it. So you don't have to sort of second guess what the notes meant, or just it's very helpful.
It's true. And when they write in a piece of clothing specifically, it has a purpose. It's not just a placeholder open to interpretation.
There are so many ways into the world of clothing, fashion, costumes. Like, what were sort of the inspirations, like any particular films or costume designers or fashion designers that sort of drew you into kind of the world of costume design? Megan, we could start with you.
I grew up in the Midwest, and I had no idea that this was a career that you could have. But I was always a lover of movies. So when I was a child, I grew up watching Wizard of Oz, I think every day for about 3 years. And I would put on my Dorothy outfit that my mom had made me, and I would stand in front of the TV wrapped for the duration of the film. So I still love that movie. So that was influential. I would say, gosh, there's so many things. I mean, things like Annie Hall, where they took this, it was kind of groundbreaking in its androgyny. Looking to period films, Bonnie and Clyde, how it was set in the 30s, but it had this 60s sensibility to it, and it actually pushed fashion so much in that time. But I had no idea that this was a career. So when I went to college in LA, I thought I was going to college for broadcast journalism, and in the film and television school at the college I went to. And it turned out, obviously, my college was in Los Angeles, so it was much more focused on film and TV. And that's where I found my place. And I just thought, well, this is perfect. This is how I want to tell stories. And so I was influenced at that point by the mentors that I had.
Well, I loved the animated Cinderella when the mice and the birds fixed her dress. I think that probably was my starting point. So,
that's a good one.
I started in theater in New York, and I really took to it. And I was always someone who sewed, and I was a history and film major in college. And I did not know that you could actually make a movie, make a living in movies in clothing. But I did love the theater, and I, just sheer, one of those stories. Someone needed someone on a film. And the first film I worked on, you're not going to believe this, I was Betty Davis's dresser. Okay. That's
wow.
I know. Okay. And I didn't even know what a dresser was. And I can't say I really functioned as a dresser. I was just there. And it was an HBO film. And, it makes me sound like I'm 100, but it was my first film. Okay. I'm just saying. But, I worked with Miss Davis. So.
That's great.
And I just thought, when you work on movies, you work with like Betty Davis.
Love to hear some of those stories.
I was like Megan, raised in the Midwest, small town, and like Susan, didn't know a business like film business even existed. There wasn't much of it where I grew up, and I was just vintage girl. I just dressed head to toe in vintage, and I loved old Ginger Rogers, Fred Astaire dance movies. I loved all the gowns and the dancing, and watched them endlessly. And but I never really thought about being in it. It kind of chose me, as woo-woo as that sounds. It really just chose me, and it's a blur how it all happened. I still don't remember. I still just sometimes wonder how I ended up here, but I'm grateful.
I always wonder, like when you spend so much of your time and your career dealing in clothes and fashion and different characters and different periods, does any of it sort of like find you like transforming your own style or influencing what you like and the kind of ways it can kind of portray you in a way? Susan, you can start us.
That's a good question. I actually think that the longer I do this, the more anchored I become in my own personal style. And I'm getting really good at knowing what's going to really last. And I'm very, I don't know. I don't know if this ever happens to you, Megan, or you, Lou, where people go, "Oh, you must love Halloween." And I'm like, I loathe Halloween. Okay. So I actually, I prefer, and especially, you know, as you age, you want to be sort of just look, if you're photographed, it's going to look good in 20 years too. And, you know, I don't like to be, you know, I don't want a trend of the moment. It doesn't really work unless you're in your 20s, you know, maybe, but it has made me oddly, maybe more conservative in a way. Conservative is not really the right word, just more controlled, and really have a much better understanding of proportion. I will say that, and silhouette, and that has definitely developed over the years. Just at a glance, does it look good? And that's you know. So
I happen to love fashion. I don't have time to really keep up on it much, but I do love it, and I love dressing, and but I keep wanting to have a uniform to keep it easier. I try, and then I get bored. I just get bored with it, and I just want to wear something fun and bright and ridiculous, and that's kind of, and it's all over the board. One day I'll have a tracksuit on, and the next day I'll be in a full-length cashmere dress. I don't know. It's just, there's no rhythm or rhyme to it, but it's very eclectic for me.
I'm a bit of a chameleon. I guess I could say that I would be influenced by what I'm working on in the moment to a certain extent, but I'm also a freak about fit. So the things that make it past my threshold of fit and all my requirements to make it into my actual closet, there's not that many of them. And really I'm a vintage lover for my whole life. And the only thing that really interests me in terms of shopping is vintage, personally.
yeah, I would agree with that.
That really sparks my, I don't know, it really gets me going. But then you find stuff when you're out shopping, and you find stuff on the, you know, things on the runway that you want to emulate or whatever. But yeah, there's something about something that's had a life before you and that's one of a kind, or, you know, at this point anyway, pretty much one of a kind, because all the duplicates of it have gotten ravaged by time. That feels good.
I would say that the prom did not make me want to run out and buy any prom dresses.
No.
I would wear a man's tuxedo.
Yeah.
I would wear all of those men's tuxedos in the film, by the way. If you have any extras, you can send them to me. And you all mentioned like sort of coming up, like not even really thinking of this as like a career path that one could take. Like, what would you kind of say to someone who has an interest or is coming up in fashion or costume design, or advice maybe you wish you had gotten when you were coming up? Lou, how about you?
That's always a tricky one. Like, one part of me wants to say run. Run away! Because the hours are long and you don't really, I mean, maybe Megan and Susan experience it differently, but when you're working, you are working, and you kind of, your friends drop aside, your husband, your kid, your partner, whatever. It's like you just are in it, and you resolve to that. And if it's your passion, it's fine, but it does eat away, or in my life anyway, it's eaten away at a lot of, I've lost a lot of important events and things like that, but I don't really have any regret, because when you do feel like you have a creative spirit, and when you're fulfilling that creative spirit, it just feeds you. And so if it's your passion, I think you'll know it. I think that when it's your passion, like the three of us, it will kind of flow for you, and you will know the minute you try it. If you get bitten by that bug, and you're like, I have to do this. That's like, if you can get in the door, or if you're trying to, a lot of students who just graduate from school, like any of the design schools, you know, to try to PA or intern. We can't intern right now with COVID, but getting a PA job, you really get a feel for it, and you'll know, like, whether you can hack it or not, or if it's something I really got to do. That's what I've had a lot of people reach out over COVID, just asking advice, and so we built kind of a summer mentorship, and just getting on Zoom calls and telling them what it's like to be a PA or what it's like to be a designer, and then trying to, when film started back up again, trying to get them placed places to dip their toe in it.
I do think it. If I was to tell my younger self, I think the amount of work, how consuming it is something I didn't understand, but I totally embraced. So I think you, like Lou said, if you're cut out for it, you're going to do it. But I do think it's a little like being an actor or a musician, is that you really, you kind of just have to do it. It's not even, it's too hard to not love it. So that, I would really stress that.
I would echo what you guys said. I mean, it is so hard. There are parts of your life that fall away, and I've tried to make some boundaries, but you know, it depends on the show. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't, and sometimes you disappear to another country for 5 months. But that's a really fun part of it too, is you get paid to go to these incredible places and meet interesting people and travel. So if you are able to intern or PA and just get in there and see what the true everyday life of it is like, and then you will get an immediate sense of whether or not it's right for you. But then also I would give the advice that I didn't really take. When I was younger, I was always very timid about contacting people. I always felt like, I would take time away from their day. They don't want to hear from some random lowly, 20-year-old. And now that people sometimes email me, I can see how responsive everyone actually is to that, to giving advice, to opening a door to somebody who's interested. And so my advice would be, be shameless, reach out, tell people you're available. Tell people you admire their work and you want to PA for them, and then keep following up, because everybody gets busy and sometimes you forget to return that email, but it doesn't mean that you're not interested.
That's actually really true. That's very good advice, is that, we just don't, pay attention all the time. But I would also advise young people that if you are going to do that, make sure that you check all your spelling and check your and make it seem like you really tried. And if you give a reference, make sure they know that you're giving them as a reference, so that if I call them, you don't get a bad reference. That's important. And I would also advise young designers that if you get the chance to do some little indie film or just, a student film, is do it. Do it, be the costume designer. If you want to be a costume designer, just be the costume designer. Because no matter what, you will have been the costume designer for that 15-minute film. And you were not the PA, you ran the department, no matter what it is. And that can never be taken away from you. I do tell people that. It's like, if you get the chance, just grab it and you'll understand what it means to be, holding the ball for the show. And you can't, it's not for everybody, but some people prefer to work their way up. But certainly when I started, there was no such thing as a coordinator or even a PA. There was nothing like that. So you just, I used to track the whole show in the back of my notebook. So I feel like that that is a good experience for young people. If you're, get that chance, just do it.
I will point out that you got to start with Betty Davis.
That's right. And sometime when I meet you in person, we'll discuss, because I have some pretty good stories about that.
Wow.
Yes.
Well, I want to thank you, all three of you, so much for your time and for talking with me, and for really letting me get to know such very different kinds of costume design that all three of you were involved in. And it's been a pleasure talking with all of you.
Thank you.
Daniel.
Thank you so much. It's great to meet both of you.
Bye, Megan.
Bye.